It's Adam here for PC Monitors, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the OSD on-screen display menu system of the BenQ XL2730Z. The OSD is controlled by two different methods. You can either use these little pressable buttons here that run along the bottom of the right bezel, or you can use this, the S-switch arc, which has a little sort of holder, an indentation in the stand where it'll sit. It's got rubber feet on the bottom so it stays put, it's pretty grippy. Or alternatively you can just place it wherever you want, as long as the cable will allow. I mean, it's a pretty long cable, so you've got good flexibility with where you place that. So if you press the top button here, it gets up this little quick menu thing. The top, by default, the top option there is the black equalizer, which allows you to enhance the visibility in dark areas in games, for example. It's a gamma enhancement feature, so you can set that between 0 and 100, 0 and 20, and that'll change the intensity of the effect. I like to keep it on 0 because I like image accuracy. There's a blur reduction feature, which is explored in the review, a strobe backlight feature of the monitor to reduce motion blur. That's the second option down there by default. Third button down allows you to change the picture mode, so change one of the Sensei presets basically. So there are various presets there which were explored in the calibration section of the review, and if you cycle between them it does actually apply the preset, and the screen goes blank briefly, so for some of them it does anyway, so it can take a while to actually cycle through them. And then there's the main menu and exit. And there's also a power button here, which has a sort of a white power symbol, a white power LED, and you can actually, in the menu, you can actually change the intensity of that, which I'll come on to a bit later. As for the S switch, it has a little scroll wheel for navigating through the menu system. It also has a back button, auto mode, which that's auto game mode, which is something that you can apply if you're using the BenQ Display Pilot software, and that will allow you to use various different preset modes and different settings for different games, so you have to tell the computer which game should use which settings. And then there's 3 gamer mode presets there, 1, 2 and 3, which allow quick access to 3 different sets of settings. So, I mean, I find the S switch a much easier way to actually control the menu system. I really like the S switch, so I'm going to be using that to show you the main menu of the monitor. I'm just going to turn the brightness down a little bit, because otherwise it's going to appear a bit flooded and you probably won't be able to see the menu system correctly. So the first bit of the menu there, game settings, has various features of the monitor, like blur reduction, black equalizer, which we've already looked at. There's a color vibrance feature, which you can set between 0 and 20, and that is essentially like a sort of monitor hardware version of NVIDIA's digital color vibrance feature. So it increases the saturation of the image, but if you increase that you also reduce the shade range. It pulls shades out towards the edge of the color gamut of the monitor so that they appear more saturated, but it doesn't actually alter the color gamut itself. There's a lower blue light setting, which is also explored in the review, and you can set that between 0 and 10. There's instant mode, which essentially just reduces the input lag of the monitor, and I haven't actually noticed any negative effect turning that off, and it is on by default, so I would just leave that on. And there's auto game mode, which I've already been through, and an option to save all of your settings as Gamer 1, Gamer 2 or Gamer 3. And that's not just the settings on this game settings menu, it's all of your other settings on the menu system as well, including these picture settings here. So again, there's picture mode, you can change the image preset. There is brightness, contrast, sharpness, and sharpness goes again between 0 and 10, set to 5 by default. You can select one of 5 different gamma modes, each increasing the gamma respectively, and on my unit gamma 5 actually worked out the best, but that's not always the case. It seems from other reviews that sometimes the default gamma 3 is actually the best if you're looking for 2.2 gamma tracking. There's a colour temperature option, and here if you've got user defined you can set the red, green and blue colour channels independently. There's AMA, Advanced Motion Acceleration, which is it's BenQ's Pixel Overdrive feature, and that is set to high by default, but at the moment on the revision of this monitor that I'm reviewing, it's actually forcibly set to off if you're using FreeSync. No matter what you actually select here, it's always going to be off, and I explore the sort of ins and outs of that in the review, but I've never seen any situation where I'd want to use the premium setting. It just creates this sort of messy inverse ghosting disco on the screen. It's just not pleasant at all. There's a dynamic contrast feature, again explored in the review, and you can set the intensity of that between 0 and 5. And there's an option to reset all of the picture options to the factory defaults. Next, there's the display section of the menu, and that allows you to select the input used by the monitor, and also has this display mode feature, which allows the monitor to, well, one of the things it does is allow the monitor to emulate a range of different screen sizes and aspect ratios. So you've got here 17-inch 4:3, 19-inch 4:3, 19-inch 5:4. I mean, some of these are obviously very different to the size and the aspect ratio of this monitor itself, so the image looks squashed. It's just, if you're really used to using a particular aspect ratio and screen size, or if you're playing an old game or whatever, then that might be a useful feature for you. And there's 19-inch 16:10, 21.5-inch 16:9, 22-inch 16:10, 23-inch 16:9, 23.6-inch 16:9, and 24-inch 16:9. Another interesting thing is, once you've actually got one of these activated, for example I've got the 22-inch 16:10 here, there's also a smart scaling feature which you can use, and all that does is just basically just increases the size of the image from so it fills out more of the screen, and it's only used in conjunction with these different display mode emulated settings here. And to be honest, it seems a bit counterintuitive to me. If you're using a display mode trying to emulate a specific aspect ratio and resolution, you then change that when you use smart scaling. So it's a bit of an odd feature, to be honest, but it's there anyway if you want to use it. Another aspect of the display mode settings, which I suppose is perhaps has a broader appeal, is the ability to change how the monitor handles its interpolation, or how it scales the image when you're running non-native resolutions. So I'm just going to put that back on full, and then I'm going to change the monitor's resolution to full HD so I can show you some of these features. Okay, so I'm just changing the resolution to full HD there. Now if I go back on the menu system, onto that section of the menu, you should see that there are a couple more options here. See, there's a full, which means that the image, the monitor uses interpolation, and it uses all of its pixels, and regardless of which resolution you select, it'll fill the entire screen. So it does look a bit softer. It's something I will discuss a bit more in the review. It's not like looking at a 27-inch native Full HD monitor. You know, there is a bit of a downside to running non-native resolutions on this monitor, as with pretty much any monitor really, any LCD monitor. And if you want to maintain the sort of native sharpness, you have to select the 1:1 option here. And what that'll do is it'll display only 1920 by 1080 pixels, and it'll give you a black border for the remaining pixels of the monitor. So the image itself is completely sharp, but there's obviously that black border. So it's really up to you how you want to display native non-native resolutions. And there's also an aspect mode which is greyed out here, and I've actually tried selecting a couple of resolutions and it always seems to be greyed out, so I'm not sure if there are specific, there must be very low resolutions which will actually allow you to use this setting, but I think really the main settings people want to use are either full or 1:1. So I'm just going to set the monitor back to its nice native resolution of 2560 by 1440. There we go, and then we'll move on. And there are also some HDMI RGB range, which is only available if you've got HDMI connected, and a few options there, overscan geometry, which only apply to the analog VGA connection, so that's why all of that's grayed out as well. Next, there's a system menu, and that has a couple of other settings which you can play with. You can adjust the volume of the integrated headphone jack, or you can mute it. There are some basic OSD settings that you can adjust, which apply to how the OSD itself is presented on the screen. You can change the language, for example. Oops. I've accidentally changed the language to something I don't understand, which isn't very helpful. I'll put that back to English. You can adjust how long the menu remains on the screen, the idle timeout period, before it'll disappear without you pressing any buttons. So I've got that set to 30 seconds at the moment, which is the maximum, and that's just so I can talk you through some of the features without the OSD disappearing on me. And there's also an OSD lock feature, which will just lock the OSD. Maybe if you've got family members you don't want fiddling with your settings or something, you might want to use the OSD lock. There are custom keys here, custom key 1, custom key 2 and custom key 3, and these apply to the top 3 buttons here on the monitor before you've actually entered the main menu system. So if you recall, the top button there was black equalizer by default, and then there was a blur reduction feature, and the third key down was picture mode, but you can actually change that to a number of different things. So if you don't use the black equalizer very often, maybe you'd want to have an easy way to access the color vibrance or the low blue light settings, for example. You can also adjust the contrast, volume, mute the integrated headphone jack, change the input, brightness, display mode, auto game mode. So I mean, for me personally, I'm quite happy to use the S switch for most things, so I don't really rely on these custom keys too much, but I probably choose, well, I mean, as I explore in the review, I don't actually use the low blue light settings specifically, because they're a bit limited in their effectiveness, but you could, for example, have low blue light settings. Brightness is something that is quite useful to be able to adjust quickly. And I'll just keep the third on picture mode, that's fine. So now you see the icons and what each button does has changed. So you can change the low blue light very quickly, or the brightness of the monitor very quickly. that's quite a nice little bit of flexibility you get there. And finally, there's an information section which just tells you a few basic things about the monitor, such as the model of the monitor, the input that's currently being used, the resolution that's currently being used, and the optimum resolution. And yeah, because I've changed it to full HD, and then back to its default, it's whacked the refresh rate down to 60 Hz, but just to show you, it does very comfortably do 144 Hz. I've actually got it connected to an NVIDIA graphics card at the moment, and some people were worried that for some reason, because this is a FreeSync monitor, it might not run at 144 Hz on NVIDIA systems. Well, that's not actually the case. It very happily runs at 144 Hz regardless of your graphics card vendor. So there we go, you see, 144. Next, there are other settings, and there are a fair few other settings here. There's a resolution notice, which means if you're running the monitor in a non-native resolution, it'll just remind you on the screen of the optimal resolution of the monitor, so that's slightly annoying. I've turned that off. There's a buzzer feature, which I've also turned off, which is even more annoying, and this is actually on by default. And what this does is every time you press a button or use the S switch, it makes this, it's not really a buzz, it's more of an annoying kind of quite high-pitched beeping noise. It's just, I really can't understand why anyone would want that on, but you can fortunately turn it off. You can allow the monitor to automatically select the input for you, or if you want manual selection of the input, you can turn that off. There's an auto pivot sensor, and what that does is allows the monitor, if you're using the display pilot software, the monitor will know when it's in portrait mode and adjust everything accordingly. There's an auto power off feature, which will automatically turn the monitors onto standby mode after a certain amount of time. There is an LED indicator, that's the power LED there, and that's set to medium by default. If you prefer, you can also have that off, or you can have it a little bit brighter, set to high. I'm in quite a bright room at the moment, so you can't actually see the difference between high and medium on this video, and it's not exactly, there's quite a fair difference in real life, but I'm quite happy with the medium setting myself. And finally on here there's a DDC/CI, which is required to use the BenQ display pilot software, and it basically allows software to control the monitor. It's part of the plug and play standard for the monitor, and it's really only for compatibility why you might want to turn that off. On modern operating systems, you just want to leave that on. And there's a nice setting here. If you've just messed around with loads of settings, you've screwed everything up, reset all. Very useful. So there you have it. That was a rather extensive OSD on-screen display menu system of the BenQ XL2730Z. Be sure to check out the full review on PCmonitors.info.